Good afternoon, everyone, and we'd like to welcome you to this webinar sponsored by the National Association of Extension Program and Staff Development Professionals. My name is Gwen Sheely. I'm with Michigan State University Extension, and we're really excited to have you here today with us. Just a couple things to go over before we get started. If you'd like to ask any questions throughout the webinar, we'll be using the chat feature today. The chat feature is located in the bottom part of your screen, of your Zoom screen. And if you click on the chat option, a window will open up. You can type in your question and submit. We'll also be using the raise hand feature, which is also found at the bottom of your screen. And if for by some chance you're not seeing that right now, if you roll your mouse over the bottom, it'll show up for you. I also want to mention that we will be recording this webinar. All of the recordings from our webinars are found on the NAEPSDP website under the Webinars tab. So for today's webinar, we have Celeste Carmichael with us from Cornell University. And she has joined us today to talk about building stronger collaborative teams. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Celeste.
Thanks, Gwen. So as Gwen said, I'm Celeste Carmichael. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension. So Cornell is the land-grant university in New York State. My role here is Program Development and Accountability Specialist. And one of the things that I have found to be sometimes the most challenging and oftentimes the most rewarding is working in collaborative teams and partnerships. So I thought this would be a good topic. This was a table topic that we talked about at a recent NAEPSDP conference, and it seems to be pretty popular with others as well. So we'll see what you think here. I'm going to go ahead and I'll introduce myself a little bit more, then we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So I encourage you, Gwen shared, just how to get interact, and I really want to encourage you to do that, to use your chat feature, and we are going to use the hand raising feature. The work that I do is oftentimes around reporting. So for those of my colleagues that are on from New York State, especially those in counties, know me from the encouragement of reporting accurate content and data. Oftentimes I'm working with staff to help shape programs, so the program development side. My background is really varied. I've worked for Extension for 28 years now. Starting out, I had an undergraduate degree in biology and was really looking for an opportunity for some field work. And I found this thing called Cooperative Extension where, there were all sorts of folks with lots of different varied backgrounds that were all very excited and enthusiastic about what they were doing, and they were working within their communities. So I used my biology background as an IPM scout when I first started in Extension, and then found other work in 4-H youth development and natural resources, ended up getting a master's degree in environmental resource engineering, worked in the state 4-H office for quite a while, planning STEM programs. And then a couple years ago, I found that I was doing a lot of online work and really wanted to build my credentials. So I went back to school and got a degree in instructional design and online learning, and ended up taking a class in collaborative learning and communities of practice. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I learned and how we've applied some of those things in New York State, and get some ideas that you have. But so the picture that you see is from a blog site that I have, cellcarmichael.com, that just talks a little bit about some of the work projects that I have worked on. And the waterfall that you see is a local waterfall in the Finger Lakes of Central New York. That's where I live, and it's a place that I hike regularly, so you can know a little bit about who I am and the kinds of things that I do. So the plan for today is we're going to have an opportunity for you to share some experiences. We'll together reflect on some research and theoretical findings about working collaboratively, and then consider some ways to apply some of this work. I'll share with you how we are applying some of these ideas in New York State, how I would like to apply some ideas, and then we'll invite you to evaluate this webinar opportunity, and tell you a little bit about the upcoming NAEPSDP virtual summer series that's coming up. So that is what we have going on here. So here's the first interactive portion, and I'm going to ask Gwen I don't know if it's clear for everybody how to raise your hand, but I want you to think of a time when you were working collaboratively with a team of people. And once you have that idea in your head, if you can go ahead and raise your hand when you have a thought of an example. So Gwen, I'm not sure that I can see all of the hands being raised here. So maybe you can tell me what that all looks like.
All right, we have a lot of hands being raised right now. I think probably 75% have raised their hand.
Okay, well, that's what I figured. Okay, there, now I see the hand raised. Most of us have had some kind of, whether it's working with the folks that are down the hall from you on a collaborative project, or working in a professional development organization like NAEPSDP or the 4-H educators network of folks, whatever it is. Most of us have had an opportunity to work collaboratively with a team of people. Oftentimes, they may be people that we see. Sometimes they may be people that we don't see. I guess I just wanted to make sure that, we just have that idea in your head of one particular idea. All right, because then my second question is, were there things that happened that made your team work together successfully? So if you can take some time to add to the chat box and ensure that you're, let's see, is there a way, Gwen, that they can reply so that everybody can see their responses? I didn't see that in advance.
I just changed that feature, so hopefully.
Okay. Great. So what made it work successfully? And I'll read some of these things because I'm seeing some things go to panelists. Listening and sharing, working on something important, giving everyone a chance to talk and be heard, discussion ideas with all, constant communication, having a goal, using Teams to discuss items instead of emails, puts it all in one place, verifying expectations, consistent communication and follow through, ongoing communication, kept the number of people involved to a small number. Everyone had a clear understanding of tasks, regular meetings, mutual respect, an organized process, meeting regularly. All right, so looking good. You've got some great ideas here. I'm going to ask you as you're typing some things in, if you can, I don't know if you're able to, but if you can change your setting to respond or chat to all participants. Doesn't look like that's an option for me, Gwen.
Most people are.
Okay.
Most of them are being shared with everyone. As long as when you click on the drop down to submit your chat response, just make sure to select all panelists and other attendees, and you should be all set.
All right, thank you. All right, so those are some great ideas, right? So we know what things make collaborative learning work well, but I bet you've had some experiences that there were some kind of caution flag. So if you want to go ahead and think about that a little bit and share your experiences, add your experiences to the chat box. All right. So what didn't go so well? Where were there caution flags? Have you had any experiences like that? No accountability for what needs to be done. When one or more people thought that they were the expert, people not following through, team members don't respond to critical emails, lack of transparency. Okay, these are all great. Accountability, too many people, when credit wasn't given. All right, so I think we have just as many things that have that provide some red flags and negative experiences as positive experiences. All right, so I think this topic is super interesting because we are working more and more. We're called to work in teams, and oftentimes those teams are not in the same place. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is how do we create that environment where people can and are encouraged to work together. Is there anything that we can do as creators of that environment to make it work a little bit better? All right, so this little graphic, learn, share, and co-create, are kind of three of the basic principles around collaborative working and collaborative teams. And I think that the co-creation piece is something that I certainly saw come up in the things that work well when you're working together on something that is relevant, right? I think it's also important to talk a little bit about what collaborative teams are. So I'm going to shift to using the phrase communities of practice, all right, which is what I found to be a more common description in the literature. And I think it's what we're all referring to here. And I realize that there's some of us that have been in extension for a long time that might hesitate or pause a little bit in using that term, because the phrase is really, intertwined with e-extension. But I also think that, that's where we're going to find the most references for what this collaborative teams and collaborative work is. So I am going to use that reference. So I'm not sure which came first, the term communities of practice or e-extension or the research behind communities of practice. But they very well could have co-evolved, and somebody on this webinar might really know more about that history. But I am going to refer to communities of practice and the work that Eddie and Wegner and Jean Lev have done related to communities of practice. And I want you to try to think about how that relates to extension work. So just a little bit of background on some theory and that practice of communities of practice and where it all comes from, just to place it in our heads as kind of well documented ways of working together, right? So there's I think three learning theories that are really behind the work of communities of practice. Adult learning theory, which you may be familiar with, Malcolm Knowles, like late 60s, right, was really talked about the elements that really need to be in place in order for adults to learn. They have to be engaged in the process, that their experience has to be embraced. So I saw somewhere in the comments there about when credit isn't given, there's egos involved, right? So embracing the fact that all learners are coming to the table, whether they're a learner or a practitioner in the collaborative experience, and they have to be, asked to come to the table, or what they are bringing is valuable. The experience needs to be relevant to them and problem-centered, right? Because we're all super busy, and so unless you may be forced or asked to be a part of a community of practice or a collaborative experience, but unless it really relates to you, it may not feel relevant. So I think adult learning theory is definitely, behind some of this collaborative working. There's also the social learning theories. Albert Bandura in the early 70s wrote about how when there's a social aspect to learning and to an experience, then people are more likely to kind of keep each other grounded. So the work that you're doing, the thinking that you're doing, you're socializing, you're talking with each other. You're helping to make sure that other people are doing what they need to do, that there's no hidden agendas or unclear deadlines. There's a social aspect to that learning and that experience. And then the work that Jean Lev did around situational learning theory really talked about how any non-formal learning, she really studied apprenticeship, is an authentic situation. So when people are in an experience and they're really living that experience, they're learning a whole lot more than just a topical or a content area. They're learning about the social practices of that community, and they're gaining some knowledge about not just the content and how to do something and complete a task, but how to work with each other. So, so those three theories about learning really, I think, are really important to this idea of communities of practice. So it was Gene Love and Eddie and Wegner that kind of coined this phrase in the early 90s. And like I said, not really knowing exactly when the communities of practice e-extension came to light. I think that they may have been co-evolving, or e-extension may have embraced this idea or the language around communities of practice early. But they basically say, if there's a shared area of interest with some key issues that people are working on, and there's relationships that are built through things like discussion and activities and learning events, and then there's a practice of the ways that people work together to co-create information, that community of practice is going to be a richer experience than just a one-off opportunity to get something done, to be task-oriented, and it may live, live for quite a while. The whole idea behind communities of practice also focuses on it being a self-guided, or self-interest has to be involved, and I think I saw that somewhere in the comments as well, is that people have to be engaged and interested in this collaborative, whatever it is that they're doing, in order to, to get things done, to be an active member of the community, to be engaged socially with the other people that are involved, and to be respectful of other people. So that that interest of making sure that people are working together and they are self-driven is super important in all of this. So I thought it would be helpful to just kind of think about some of the research and the theories behind why a community of practice or collaborative work might be helpful. So this next visual is something that came out of Eddie and Wegner's work quite a while ago. I think it's still relevant. There's a lot of articles that are written about communities of practice and books that are written about communities of practice. So I mentioned I took a class in graduate school that supported the idea of digital communities of practice. And I think that this image really speaks the most to me as one that describes some of the rich relationships that are built on the success of a community. So there's a lot of things on here because this is a revision. This is a graphic from 2001 that might not be as relevant as they were at that time, but the ideas I think are all still good here. So let me grab if I can grab look like I can, I don't know, okay, if you can see my my pointer, but I can just tell you, I can verbalize the, sharing experience, documents, having a place for documents and knowledge, having work that you're doing together and creating together, and work projects that you're creating together. Communities, like social networks of people, group discussions, an opportunity for people to interact with each other, having an opportunity for synchronous communication, so web meetings and that sort of thing, and opportunities for continued learning or online learning or sharing of good resources for continued learning in whatever the topical area is. These are all elements that make a community of practice richer. So I really like this visual because it helps me kind of think about, frame, if I'm working on something, does it involve all of these things? And then what kind of framework or what platform are we using that can connect all of these elements together? So like I said, it's not, it's 2001 is the date on there, not super fresh, but a lot of these things are still in existence, and the ideas, I think, are very much still in existence. So, and this is just a, a simpler visual of the same thing. And I think the question that I ask myself, are we regularly creating an environment where there's room for sharing expertise, sharing documents, co-creating work, creating some social media and connections, discussing things as a group rather than top down, and communicating in synchronous ways? And I think that those are the, so those are, there's not always one answer of, like I said, I spent quite a bit of time looking for a platform that provides all of those things. And I don't know that I have found, you may have found a way to really do that, but there's various things like the last slide shows that could be used together in order to provide those parts and pieces so that a group of people who are working across the country or around the world can work together to share expertise, share documents, co-create work, discuss things as a group, communicate, have some kind of social connections, because we may be in a digital world, constantly. I don't have to tell you guys this. It's being able to see each other, talk with each other, establish relationships with other people is super critical and very helpful in all of this. So that short list, I think, is probably the most important part. So I'm kind of curious how what you may have incorporated. And I've got a question here in a couple of slides to tease some of that out. But I'm going to tell you next a little bit about an example. And I see quite a few folks from New York State who are on something that we call program work teams. And I know Michigan State also has program work teams. Program work teams are people who are on campus, off campus, external stakeholders kind of working together around a topical interest. They are essentially a community of practice around an issue. So anybody can start a program work team. There has to be a off-campus person, an on-campus person, and some external stakeholders engaged and interested, and then they petition our leadership within Cooperative Extension Administration to say, hey, we would like to do this, and these are the kinds of things that we would like to achieve. There's not a lot of rules and regulations about how that work gets done, but the topical area should have some relevancy to our land-grant university. So we've had program work teams in place probably since the early 90s. So again, it makes, I think a lot of the staff that were around back when I started this kind of work have retired at this point in time, but I'm kind of curious whether or not that Wegner's work and Lave's work around communities of practice sort of influenced it, because, and you can see there's a little bit of a description here of the richness of our program work team list and how many stakeholders and how many people are involved. There are roughly 42 program work teams in place right now, all kinds of topics from hard cider to 4-H youth development, STEM education, to healthy living and environments in 4-H, to viticulture. Kind of the topics are grown from the people that are involved. So there's that self-driving experience that our people, in New York State are things that they're interested in. They petition to have a program work team. Overall, there's over 900 people, staff, faculty, and stakeholders that are involved in program work teams. As I said, they self-identify their interests, so staff members in Extension do not have to be involved in a program work team, but they are encouraged to be, kind of be interested in something and be involved in these program work teams. The group practice really depends on the interests of the people that are involved in the PWT. So if that PWT is very digitally driven, then they may do all of their work kind of in a platform that provides all of those experiences that the last couple of slides included. If they are not, sometimes we have program work teams that just have conference calls on a regular basis to connect and stay connected. They each have sort of their own practice and their own, some of them are really deeply engaged in writing proposals and bringing in funding and working on projects that are related to or connected to some kind of research, and others are more just kind of getting people on board. So the spectrum of the work of these program work teams really varies, and we have taken the stance of that's okay. I find it interesting to see the research about communities of practice kind of says that that's all right. You might have some people that are just starting to get going, or maybe that's all they need is an opportunity to stay connected. But the richest experiences are those that have all of those options from the last slide. They are working together. They have a practice of working together. They have projects that they work on, so on and so forth. There's also an opportunity for these program work teams to apply for small dollars for innovation. A lot of, it's Smith-Lever funding, so it's all related to educational programs. Oftentimes it's used for professional development. Some cases it's used to create handouts or curriculum or websites that have educational content around that particular program. But those small dollars, and I mean they're small, $2,000 to $3,000, really are intended to just kind of encourage the PWT to take action to work on a project. They each have a listserv, so an opportunity to communicate, and they each have at least 2 chairs. Sometimes they have more than 2 chairs. We call them co-chairs, but it's more than a co. It's somebody is usually representing the logistics of getting things done. One has to represent somebody from one of our county associations, and one from our campus staff, which doesn't have to be faculty. It could be anybody on campus that is more closely aligned and connected with departments and research. So I wanted to share this experience because as we talk about collaborative work and look at the research and the references to communities of practice, this is one place where I feel like we are really working hard on, and Cornell Cooperative Extension is helping to provide that environment that's going to build program work teams. So this next slide is just a public-facing page. The URL is on top. I saw somebody asked about slides. Yes, the slides will be shared. There's the link, so if anybody wanted to see more about what these program work teams are like and how one would go about getting involved, just to kind of see what that process is, there's a page that has a link to another page that has a list about all of the program work team, how a person would get involved, and by involvement, it could be, like I said, from the looking in peripheral knowledge builder to somebody being actively involved and taking some kind of leadership with a program work team. It's the engagement really runs the gamut, and we are intentionally okay with that. We have resources for the chairs of the program work teams to help support the work that they're doing, and resources also for the members to help them to better understand how to work in a program work team. All right, and here's just an example of one of the references that we put out, just quickly showing the list of program work teams, the innovation funds that have been given to them, and what those funds did in the last year. And that's all available on our public site if anybody wanted to take a look at that. So I wanted to share, so there was the ideas from Wegner and Lev about communities of practice, and the graphic that showed all of these opportunities for engagement, and how if we, if we create an environment that kind of feeds all of those ideas, it helps to create a richer environment for communities of practice. And I would agree with all of that, but I feel like there may be some things that are implied in all of that, but I haven't seen them completely spelled out in the research. So I wanted to share a few of my own thoughts on best practices, and I think I saw some of this also coming out in the chat as we were talking about what works and what doesn't necessarily work. So we have found that regular communication, so I used the program work teams as an example, but in kind of any collaborative work environment that I've worked in, regular communication, whether it's announcements coming from kind of top down or pushed out about what's going on, super helpful. Otherwise, people tend to lose sight of where things are, not because they're not interested, oftentimes because we're just too busy. I did a survey a couple of years ago. I went to a bunch of folks, both at Cornell and at other land grants, asking them questions about, how their communities of practice and what they feel works the best. And this was a quote from Paul Hill that I really, really liked. And that is, because I was really, again, searching for what's the platform to use that has all of these parts and pieces to help encourage digital communities of practice. And, again, I did not really hear from anybody one-stop shop, because it really depends. It depends is the answer. But what Paul said is go where the people are, and he really pointed to email, right? So almost everybody checks their email. Not everybody checks a specific website. Not everybody is engaged in a certain kind of social media, but almost everybody checks their email. So if whatever those communications are, if there's something that gets pushed out to email to help people know what it is that's going on, super helpful. So whether it's a listserv or, how oftentimes we use our learning management system, Moodle, as our kind of hub for community of practice, and I'll use the announcements feature, which pushes information out to email of that, that group that's connected there. So go where the people are. The other thing that I found is super helpful is, there's not a lot written about, specifically about leadership of a collaborative work experience or community of practice. And I did see this come out in the chat, the importance of having somebody, kind of lead the effort or facilitate the effort. And maybe facilitate is the better word there. But somebody to drive the experience, to make sure that things don't just trail off. And I have found that having more than one leader, so program work teams, we have at least co-leaders, sometimes more. Other efforts that I've been involved in. In fact, Gwen and I are co-chairs of the program committee for NAEPSDP for the webinar series, but having a co-leader ensures that you're connecting socially with somebody else and you kind of keep each other accountable. Suggested common practices. So if a community has some, common experiences and talking about those things, that's helpful. Emphasis on peer-to-peer learning and sharing. So we go back to Knoll's theory of adult learning, this idea that everybody's coming to the table with some things that they have that they want to share, right? Having that opportunity and emphasis on peer-to-peer learning and sharing has, in my experience, really helped make others at the table not just listeners, but partners in the experience and more engaged in the experience, because they're asked to bring themselves to the table, bring their experiences to the table, and asked to share or told that their experiences are valuable as well. So I like to emphasize that peer-to-peer learning and sharing is really, I have seen that be very important. And then considering ways to encourage accountability partnerships. So sometimes that's the co-leaders but other times it might be small groups within a community of practice or within a collaborative environment, a small group, so that people are, again, communicating with each other, providing that social learning environment where it's not as easy to I don't know, just be quiet about what they're learning. They're more likely to be more involved and engaged if they're encouraged and have somebody asking about what it is that they're doing. So, again, I look back to the chat. A lot of the things that I saw around, things that don't work or raise a red flag relate to, other people not doing what they have said that they're going to do, which, I'm sure that others will attest to the fact that we all get busy. But if somebody asks about something, or if I know I have a meeting scheduled, or whether it's a face-to-face or a Zoom meeting or whatever, and somebody's going to ask about something, I'm much more likely to have it all together. So these are my thoughts on best practices for collaborative learning or communities of practice. And I think they are implied in some of the other, the bullets and the items shared in Wegner's work around communities of practice, but they're not explicit. And I thought it was worth kind of re-emphasizing those things. So I'm gonna be quiet at this point and ask you what other thoughts and suggestions that you might have. So what has worked well beyond, and maybe it's reiterating some of the things that I shared, or maybe you have other ideas and you're, would like to share what it was that that has worked for you. So other thoughts and suggestions that you might have.
And just a reminder to everyone, when you submit it in the chat box, after the to area, you'll see a blue button, and click on that drop down and make sure to select all panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see your comments.
Okay. Zoom for meetings. Yep, I see that from Rich, and we have moved to, when we use Zoom, just really asking people to share their video, just so we can see each other, so we're real people on both sides of the coin. Unless it's in a webinar format where it's sage on the stage kind of style. We don't always do that, but anytime it's a meeting, that's a practice that we definitely encourage. Occasional face-to-face meetings, bi-monthly conference calls. Yep, definitely. Small groups, right? So, and if, are there folks that are using the feature within Zoom meetings that allows small group discussion? We've had a lot of success with that. People who might not be willing to share in front of a large group might be much more willing to share in a small group. Thanking people, yeah, absolutely. Collaborating on social media. So Erla, I see your comment, and I would ask if there is a social media, type of social media that you found people to be more willing to collaborate on and work through. Okay, so I see the comment, leader not being the boss, but the guiding attendee. Absolutely. I think, facilitator as opposed to a leader is maybe a good use of language. Web-based project management, right? Yeah, so, and you probably saw on that digital application of communities of practice, that ideas piece. Basecamp is listed on there. There's lots of other ways to manage projects, but yeah, but making sure somebody following through and seeing how things are going certainly helps. Assign projects based on team member strengths and interests. Yep. All right. Okay, you can keep adding adding things that work for you if you'd like. I'm kind of curious if there's any ideas that you learned today that you can envision using in your state or in your community of practice or program work team. Anything that you've seen that resonates well. Okay, investigating base camp. Is there other project management software that others are using? So Basecamp is license-based, so just kind of curious if others are using things that are free. Small groups and Zoom. Yeah, that works really well, Renee. Yeah, so Rachel, I see your message about Moodle, and Moodle works really well for us. We're using it for as a learning management system for our staff and also for the public. Other learning management systems have that same feature of being able to send announcements. So if somebody has signed on to, the negative is they have to register, to be a part of something. It's not necessarily negative, but some people may see it that way. The positive is you know who exactly is in your group, and when you send out an announcement, it's recorded and visible someplace. So, as opposed to a listserv that just sends an email, in this case, everybody can see that list of emails that may have gone out from the coordinator. Yeah. Asana. Okay. Yep. So, Catherine, I see your message about Asana. Amazing for social media integration. Would love money support for enterprising version for it at Cornell. I've used the free version. I'm not really sure what the enterprising version looks like, but maybe we can talk some more there. Okay, so Eric, I see your message that there's an e-extension access to Basecamp. So I'm not sure, does that mean that if your state is has a license or has a connection to e-extension that they would be able to use that? Yes, I see a reference to Slack. Anyone employed by an e-extension premium or basic member institution who has an e-extension ID. All right, well, that is certainly something to look into, Eric. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so, and I see SurveyMonkey and Doodle accounts for PWTs. So I don't know, I think there's a free, we can talk offline, Teresa. There's a free version of SurveyMonkey and Doodle accounts that I use all the time. So not necessarily, I don't know that has to be a system-wide thing, but certainly we can talk some more. Qualtrics. All right. All right. So it sounds like you have some good ideas of things that that might be useful. And I'm going to go back a couple of slides here to this one. You know, just really encouraging you as you work in, whether it's a community of practice, whatever you want to call it. In New York State, was we work with program work teams. As you work collaboratively with with any group of people doing work, to think about ways that everybody can share their expertise, share documents, co-create work, connect socially some way, whether it's face-to-face or, we had lots of good examples of things that people suggested, and examples in the diagram from Eddie and Wegner. But think of ways that people can make those personal human connections, build discussions as a group, and communicate in synchronous ways via, whatever works for you. Zoom or face-to-face events. But when we build all of those things together, our collaborations become a little bit richer, more fun, more interesting, for sure. Or at least that's what the research says, and certainly that's my theory. So I wanted to share a few selected references, and we'll share the slides following the webinar. And you can Google any of these people. There's a lot written about communities of practice out there. So these are some of the references that I really appreciated. Was work from Christopher Hoadley about what is a community's practice and how can we be support thinking together, what makes communities of practice work. Any of Wegner and Trainer's, so Eddie and Wegner Trainer, he's Wegner Trainer now, any of his work and his website is really fantastic. He has lots of books that are out there about cultivating communities of practice. And they're all, super interesting, to see how he's done some evaluation work around communities of practice. So to see what's come of all of that is interesting. I found a U.S. Department of Education had a booklet about exploratory research on designing online communities of practice for educators. So that was interesting. A lot of the work that's out there is really about learning, communities of practice for learning. But I think the same principles really relate to the work that we're doing collaboratively as well. And then just put a plug in for a book that I read several months ago. It was mentioned in some of the classes that I took, called Working Out Loud, John Stepper. And it's really about the practice of kind of getting involved and engaged in something new. So coming up with something that you want to learn more about, how to go about, how to create some self-initiation, and then accountability practices for doing that. And he's got some suggested work within his book that you can do in Working Out Loud circles. So getting a group of people together that want to make a change or work on something, and to connect with each other as accountability practices. So I think it works well. It connects well with the thoughts around community of practice. So I threw that out there. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or questions or anything else that you want to share. That's what I have to offer. You're welcome. Thank you for the references. All right. Gwen, do you have anything else you want to?
Yeah, could you go to our last slide? And while people are typing a few things in, I'd like to mention a few other things.
This one.
Yeah, that one right there. Wonderful. And first of all, Celeste, I'd like to thank you for presenting today. I think you've given us all some things to think about. Working in teams can be a challenge, and I know there's always things to improve. And so this has been great. And also, I think you have to give a shout out to our participants today, because all of you have done such a tremendous job today of sharing. I think I'm kind of excited about all the things that came through in the chat, and Celeste, maybe even we can kind of combine some of those comments and ideas that came through that and post that up on the website too, so we don't lose some of that information as well. I do want to mention that we do have a survey that we would love for you to fill out, and I'm going to put the URL in the chat. Okay, and so that's a link to a short survey. We're also going to be emailing all of you a link to the recording along with the survey as well, just in case you don't have a chance to complete it today, once closed captions are done for the webinar. So you'll have access to the webinar recording through that email to those that registered. We also will just be putting it up on the NAEP SDP website under the webinars tab. So make sure to check that out as well. Couple other things, we will be offering more professional development throughout the year, webinars like this. And if you have any ideas for topics, make sure to email us. Go ahead and go to our website. The contact information for the programs committee is located on the website. You can send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in suggesting a speaker or maybe possibly being a speaker yourself on a topic as well. So we would love to hear from you. And also, you know, the NAEP SDP organization, we have a national conference each year if you're not familiar with it, and just a great place to go for those that are offering professional development throughout extension. So check our organization out if you're not familiar with it. One last thing that I would like to mention is we do have a wonderful event coming up in July. Each year, NAEP SDP, along with the Southern region, offers a virtual summer school, and this year it will be July 15th through the 19th. Details are still, we're still getting them together, but we'll have the advertising and the registration out for this soon. But our focus for this year is going to be on onboarding to succession planning. So a lot of great speakers that we're getting lined up. And there'll be one each day the week of July 15th. So be on the lookout for that as well. And just checking our chat. A lot of thank yous coming in.
All right. Yeah, and a shout out to my New York State colleagues. I felt well supported. I sent this out on our listserv, and it was in our professional development news. So super happy to have so many people representing our program work teams and you know, and also staff members. To all of you, as Gwen said, NAEPSDP is open to all professionals and really staff development, professional development, evaluation colleagues. The work that's done. I went to my first conference last year, and I walked in and I said, "These are my people. These are these are the staff that do the kind of work that I do," and I was so happy to be there.
Oh, and it looks rich. I think we need to kind of point out what he added to the chat here. So Savannah, Georgia is also a great place to be in December. So it's a great place to go for those of us that are in colder climates. All right, well, I would once again, I think, Celeste, just thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for those that attended. And we'll have the recording up online definitely by next week as soon as we get the closed captions done. So Super. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.